You know that weird silence when something huge happens and nobody knows how to react? That silence just hit the PGA Tour locker room hard. It landed in January 2026. A piece of paper, a policy, the kind of document that usually goes unnoticed, but this one didn't go unnoticed. This one changed everything, because buried inside those official lines, Brian Rolapp, the new CEO, just removed Phil Mickelson from the tour's future plans. Just like that, no ceremony, no goodbye, just a set of rules that made sure one of the greatest players in golf history no longer has a path back. And the other players, they aren't shouting, they aren't celebrating. They are standing there, frozen, trying to figure out if they are next. This isn't about a bad swing or a missed cut. This is about something deeper, something that happened years ago, something that Rolap clearly never forgot. The date on that policy wasn't random, it was calculated. And when the players realized what that date actually meant, the room went dead silent. They knew Phil was the target, they just didn't know why. But here's the thing, the policy doesn't mention Phil's name once, not once. So how do you remove a legend from the game's biggest stage without ever saying his name? That is the question everyone is afraid to ask out loud. So here is my take. Was this cold, hard business? Or was it personal? Tell me what you think in the comments, and if you want the truth behind the headlines, hit subscribe right now, because this story is way bigger than one player. To understand how this happened, we have to look at who actually wrote the rules. Brian Rolapp took over as PGA Tour CEO in the middle of 2025. He came from the NFL, where he spent over 20 years building media deals and turning Sunday football into a national obsession. The tour hired him for one reason, to do the same for golf, to bring in more money, bigger audiences, and a more streamlined product, and Rolap moved fast. By January 2026, he had already rolled out a plan that would reshape the entire tour calendar, a two-tier system, the big money events at the top, everything else pushed down below. On paper, it sounded like progress. More concentrated star power, better TV ratings, bigger sponsorship dollars. But underneath that shiny surface, something smelled off. The second tier came with a catch. Entry would be restricted. Only the top players from the previous year would get full access. Everyone else would fight for scraps. Traditional tournaments, events that had been on the schedule for decades, would suddenly become second-class citizens. Most players kept their mouths shut. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? But the tension was building. Players were whispering in locker rooms, on practice greens, in private group chats. They could see where this was heading. They just didn't know how bad it would get. Then came the announcement that changed everything. The returning member program, a policy designed to bring back players who had left for LIV golf, a chance at redemption, a bridge back to the tour. The requirements seemed simple. You had to have been away from the tour for at least 2 years, and you had to have won a major championship or the Players' Championship between 2022 and 2025. 4 players fit that description: Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, Jon Rahm, Cameron Smith, 4 of the biggest names in golf, all eligible, all welcome. But here is where it gets interesting. The media started calling it the Brooks Koepka rule because it looked like the policy was built specifically for him. And that raised a question nobody could answer. If this was about bringing players back, why did the window start in 2022? Why not 2021? Why not 2020? Why draw the line exactly there? The tour called it a bridge back. But bridges are supposed to hold everyone. This one had a weight limit. Of course they would reject it. Rahm stood at that press conference in January and said he was not going anywhere. DeChambeau pointed out he was signed through 2026. Smith said he had made his decision. Koepka didn't even bother showing up to the announcement. So here is the awkward truth. The tour built a bridge, and the 4 people it was built for refused to cross it. That should have been the end of it. A failed policy, a waste of paper, a CEO who looked a little silly for building something nobody wanted. But the tour didn't look silly. They looked victorious. They looked like they had won something, and that is when the players in that locker room started paying very close attention. Because if the qualified players said no and the tour was still celebrating, then the policy wasn't really about bringing anyone back. It was about something else, something hidden in the fine print. They all walked away, so if the program is empty, why does the tour consider it a massive win? Because they weren't trying to catch the fish. They were trying to kill the shark, and that shark had a name, Phil Mickelson. Let me tell you exactly where Phil fits into this puzzle. He left for LIV Golf like the others. He sued the PGA Tour. He called them greedy. He was the ringleader, the first domino to fall, the one who made it okay for everyone else to follow. But here is the math that changes everything. The policy requires a major win between 2022 and 2025. Phil's last major victory was the 2021 PGA Championship. That is 1 year outside the window. 1 year. Think about that. If the cutoff had been 2021, Phil would be standing right next to Koepka, DeChambeau, Rahm, and Smith. Eligible. Welcome. Back in the fold. But it wasn't 2021. It was 2022. And that single year turned Phil from a returning legend into a permanent outsider. The tour didn't ban him directly. They didn't have to. They just made sure the door wouldn't open for him. And when the other players realized that, the room went quiet. Not because they felt sorry for Phil, because they realized something terrifying. If the rules could be written this precisely to exclude one specific person, then the rules weren't really rules at all. They were weapons, and nobody knew who would be the next target. The players started looking at each other differently. The veterans wondered if their history would protect them. The young stars wondered if their potential would save them. Nobody had answers. Nobody felt safe. 1 year. That is the difference between a second chance and a permanent ban. But why 2022? What happened that year that made Rolap draw the line in the sand? Let me take you back to 2022. The year everything changed. Phil Mickelson was not just a player who left. He was the player who declared war. In February of that year, an excerpt from an unauthorized biography came out. In it, Phil called the PGA Tour's leadership obnoxious greed. He said they were using their power to bully players. He said the tour was run by people who didn't care about the game, only about money. Those words were like a grenade thrown into a crowded room. They weren't just critical. They were personal. They attacked the very people who controlled his career. And the tour didn't forget. Months later, Phil sued the PGA Tour. He was trying to get an exemption that would allow him to play in the FedEx Cup playoffs. Even though he had joined Levy, the tour fought back. They won, Phil lost. That was the beginning of the war, Phil versus the PGA Tour. And in that war, there were no winners. Just a lot of scars, just a lot of bitterness, just a lot of resentment that festered for years. The tour leadership never forgave Phil for what he said. They never forgave him for the lawsuit. They never forgave him for being the first one to leave, the one who gave others permission to follow. And when Rolap took over, he inherited all of that anger, all of that unfinished business. He wasn't going to let it go. He was going to settle the score. Now, fast forward to 2026. Rolap is in charge. He is not a golf guy. He is a businessman. He doesn't care about tradition or loyalty or the old guard. He cares about control. And Phil Mickelson represents everything Rolap wants to eliminate. A player who challenged the system, insulted the leadership, and tried to tear the whole thing down. So Rolap did what any ruthless CEO would do. He built a policy that looked fair, sounded reasonable, and then surgically removed Phil from the equation without ever mentioning his name. The 2022 cutoff wasn't a coincidence. It was a weapon. It was designed to include the younger stars who might still be useful and exclude the aging rebel who had become a symbol of defiance. So the rule wasn't about eligibility, it was about accountability. And Phil is the only one being held accountable. But if Rolap got his revenge, why are the players so quiet? Because they see what happened. They know Phil is a legend, 6 majors, a career Grand Slam, millions of fans, and none of it mattered. The tour cut him out like he was nothing. If they can do that to Phil, what stops them from doing it to anyone else? If the rules can be written to target one specific player, then the rules aren't really rules. They are weapons. And any player who steps out of line could be next. That is why the locker room is silent. Not because they agree with what happened, because they are afraid to speak up, afraid to defend Phil, afraid that if they say the wrong thing, they will find themselves on the wrong side of a new policy. Some players are quietly questioning whether they should even speak to the media anymore. Others are hiring lawyers to review their contracts. The paranoia is spreading, trust is evaporating, and the silence is getting louder with every passing day. And here is the part that makes it even worse. Even if Phil had somehow qualified, the cost of coming back was almost impossible to pay. Loss of equity, loss of prize money, millions of dollars gone. Koepka was asked to donate $500,000 just for the privilege of returning. The total financial hit for any LIV player coming back could reach up to $50 million. $50 million, that is not a return program. That is a punishment program. A way to say, you can come back, but we will make you pay for leaving. We will make you suffer. So Phil is not just excluded. He is destroyed financially, professionally, and now personally, because 2026 has been brutal for Phil. He has played only one LEV event all year. He missed the Masters. He missed the PGA Championship. He missed the US Open. He missed the Open Championship. For the first time since 1990, Phil Mickelson did not play in a single major championship. That is not a coincidence. That is the result of everything we just talked about. The exclusion, the isolation, the weight of being cut off from the sport he helped build. The man who once electrified crowds at Augusta and Torrey Pines is now a ghost, a memory, a cautionary tale. And if that wasn't enough, in July 2026, a golf media outlet published a report about misconduct allegations against Phil. His representatives called it defamation. They called it anonymous sources with an agenda. But the damage was done. The narrative was shifting. Phil went from being a rebel to being a liability. Meanwhile, the tour keeps moving forward. The two-tier system is becoming reality. The Challenger Series is pushing traditional events to the margins, the Canadian Open, the Phoenix Open, the Colonial. These are not just tournaments. They are institutions. They have history. They have meaning. And they are being pushed aside like they don't matter. Rory McIlroy warned about this. He said the tour was heading in the wrong direction. He publicly humiliated Rolap by comparing the Challenger Series to the Corn Ferry Tour. He got a special exemption to play fewer events, an exemption the tour gave him to avoid a fight. But Phil didn't get an exemption. He got a rule written specifically to keep him out. And that double standard is what makes this story so infuriating for the fans who care about fairness. So let me ask you this. Was Phil wrong to say what he said? Was he wrong to call out the greed? Was he wrong to fight for what he believed in? Or was he just the only one brave enough to say what everyone else was thinking? Rolap won the battle, but he might have just lost the locker room. And a tour without trust is just a league without a soul. Right now, the PGA Tour is at a crossroads. The path they choose will define professional golf for the next decade. If they continue down this road of control and punishment, they will lose the players. They will lose the fans. They will lose the soul of the game. But if they change course, if they admit that this policy was a mistake, if they find a way to bring Phil back, they might just save themselves. The problem is, pride is a powerful thing, and neither Rolap nor Mickelson are the type to back down. So we are left watching this slow-motion train wreck, waiting to see who blinks first. Phil is 56 years old. He doesn't have many years left. This might be the end of his career, not because he stopped playing well, but because the people in charge decided he was too dangerous to keep around. And the other players, they are watching. They are learning. They are figuring out that loyalty to the tour means nothing if the tour decides you are no longer useful. So here's my take. Was this a ruthless business move to protect the tour, or a cheap shot at a legend who gave everything to this game? I want your honest take in the comments. And if you want the real story, not the corporate spin, hit subscribe. We keep it honest here, no filters. Phil is out. The silence in that locker room is deafening. And if you listen closely, you can hear something else. Fear. Fear that if it could happen to Phil, it could happen to any of them. That is the legacy of this policy. Not justice, not progress, just fear. And a game that was built on honor and respect is now being run by lawyers and accountants who don't care about either. The story isn't over. It might get worse before it gets better. But one thing is clear. The PGA Tour will never be the same. And neither will Phil Mickelson. Whether you think he deserved it or not, what happened to him is a warning to every player who dares to speak up. So the next time you see a player give a diplomatic answer, a safe answer, a boring answer, remember this story. Remember what happens to the ones who tell the truth. Phil told the truth, and they buried him for it.